Hi, my name is Laura Banks, and this is my discussion for reading number 1. The first book that we were asked to read was Teaching the Taboo, and we were supposed to read chapters 1 and 2. So for chapter 1, it was about emancipate yourself in mental slavery. So this chapter, the main idea of the chapter was teaching freedom. So as teachers, we need to teach the freedom of thought. So it's talking about not limiting our students' potential because of what is expected. The book compares education to a prison, and it talks about all the ways that we limit our students and we put definitions on what we expect of them and what we expect them not to do. And by creating all these rules and regulations, we're actually putting these ideas into our students' heads. And it kind of talks about getting away from that and more focusing on teaching students to rise above and beyond and to use their creativity and not to try to squash that creativity. We want our students to question and wonder, and we want them to enjoy their learning. So we need to focus on that aspect of teaching and not so much on the keeping them quiet and seated in their seats. So that's what we did for chapter 1. Then we moved on to chapter 2, and that's make conflict visible, the darkness in our own hearts. So the main idea here was just grappling with the truth. So it talks about reading different books and literature and how we can get different ideas from them than what is actually expected. So it goes over a lot of different examples, one being that the one that I liked the most was The Huckleberry Finn. I remember reading that book in high school and I really enjoyed it. But it talks about the different ways that you can look at that, as well as a bunch of different other books. So as a secondary educator, this is extremely important because we need to learn not to be afraid of teaching our students the truth. A lot of the time our history is offensive, and students know that regardless if we're teaching it in our classrooms or not. They understand what was happening and they still see it in their lives today. So we need to make what they're learning relate to what they're dealing with. So whether it's in literature as this example or for me in science, we need to teach them the hard facts so that they're able to grapple with that. They can actually sit and they can learn and they can work with that text or that concept and they can build on that. And that's how you're going to get students interested because it's something that relates to them. They see that in their daily lives, so they're able to really connect with it. The next book that we were asked to look at was Effective Classroom Management. So the first chapter, chapter 1, was about what is classroom management. So the main idea behind this chapter was just going over the misconceptions of classroom management. So most teachers think of classroom management as having an orderly or under control classroom. And it was talking about the change between not thinking about it that way, but thinking it as more of like the goals of what classroom management is for. So classroom management is responsible for having academic and social emotional learning. So it's just whatever you need to do to make sure that your classroom is a place where academic and social emotional learning can be happening. Chapter 2 just went over meeting the teachers and students. So throughout the book, we're going to be having different ways these teachers, they're going to be used as pretty much the examples. So they just went over each of the different teachers and students and a little bit of history behind them so that as we read the later examples, we understand the places that they're coming from. And then chapter 3 went over organizing the physical design for your classroom. The main thing here was that it's not just about your desk arrangements. So they went over the different types of desk arrangements, the pros and cons of rows versus groups. But they talked about the other things that are also important, such as minimizing traffic control or having good, pleasant room decor, arranging other furniture. Like I know for my classroom last year, the way my computer's faced is so that it blocks part of the board from the kids that are sitting right behind it. So I had to do a little bit of maneuvering, try to get my computer all the way to the edge and move the desks in. So things like that, because that student's frustrated because they can't see the board. Other things like having adequate space for interaction. So if you need kids moving around, we might have to move the desk so that they're able to do that. And that was pretty much the basics of it, and then it went over some examples of them. So classroom management is super important. Again, if you don't have a good space for students to learn, it's really difficult to keep them under control. Like, no matter how great your lesson is, if there's no academic learning going on, your lesson's pointless. So making sure you can do everything that you can in order to follow and make sure that they get what they're supposed to get out of it. The last book that we were asked to read was What Should I Do? So chapter 1 was What Should I Do? Managing Teacher Dilemmas. So this chapter focused on pretty much just discerning between the difference with problems versus dilemmas. So one of the big things it tried to get us to understand was a problem is something that can easily be fixed, like not having enough whiteboard markers or not having enough desks for your students. You can easily just ask for new desks or require those from the school and get things fixed or find another solution. Dilemmas, on the other hand, aren't easy to solve. They're challenges that we face that there's no right or wrong answer necessarily, and it talks about ways that we can learn to manage these. And one of them is just realizing that we, as teachers, our life is completely uncertain. We're going to deal with a lot of uncertainties. Going in every day, it's going to be different. And just the big thing that you take away from here is just that it takes time. You're going to learn to manage these things over time and experience. The second chapter talks about who am I as a teacher, and its dilemmas of professional identity development. And this just went over a lot of different scenarios of different teachers dealing with things such as weapons at school. It talked about teachers dealing with standardized testing and not being able to help their students, and just language barriers, race barriers. So it kind of just goes into needing to figure out who you are as a teacher. So as first-year teachers, we tend to struggle with actually knowing who we are. We go in with this idealistic version of what teaching is going to be like, and it doesn't really end up the way we thought it was going to be. And so it just talks about dealing with the fact that your identity is going to change as you teach and throughout the years, and figuring out who you want to be as a teacher and kind of staying true to that. Regardless of your situations, and trying to just manage that. So again, it all comes down to this idea of management, which is kind of a theme throughout the whole 3 books. All of them kind of talk about dealing with this idea of classroom management, management of yourself, management of these dilemmas. So I think that was really a big major theme throughout these first few chapters. So there's my discussion, and I hope you all have a great day.